Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, why am I like this? Why do I pull back when people draw close? Why do I always expect the worst? Why is it so hard for me to trust, forgive, or to even believe that I am enough? Most of us assume that it's just our personality. We say things like, that's how it's always been. Or, that's just who I am. What if the version of you that always show up every day wasn't intentionally developed, but was slowly constructed by pain, disappointment, rejection, or the environments that you had to survive? See, trauma doesn't always leave visible scars. Sometimes it leaves invisible patterns. It teaches us how to think, how to react, how to protect ourselves. And eventually, those survivor strategies become so familiar that we mistake them with our identity. I grew up in a bad environment. It's what most of us call the hood or the ghetto. Before I even turned 8 years old, I seen a person get shot and murdered right before my eyes. And all we was doing was sitting in the back of the apartments, waiting on the barber to show up so that way we can get our hair cut. My mother moved us from basically an all-black neighborhood where violence, drug use, and prostitution was skyrocketed into a multicultural ghetto, Alief, that crime was not as visible as it was before. We moved from South Park to Alief. Even though I grew up in a Christian environment or a faith, spiritual home, I was surrounded by so much chaos, so much dysfunction, so much criminality that it overpowered the spirituality that my mother was trying to instill in me when I was younger. So I did what I thought I had to do because I believe this is all there is. This is just the way it's going to be. And this is just who I am. I remember sharing with you guys this story. And another occasion, another story is when I was like 10 or 11. And I adapted this criminal, gangsterous, thuggish mindset that this is who I have to become in order for me to survive, because one movie, Menace to Society, and because it resonated with my understanding that I had to do what it takes in order to be better, my resourceful inclination, my independent, and my determination to make it happen and just make things better and be there for the ones that needed me. Concept to the character of Old Dog. I remember firsthand the exact words that he said, and it's when Cain was playing dominoes, and he felt offended by a old school gangster that was playing a role in a movie that was aggressive with a girl that he had, I guess, liked it. Well, of course he liked it. He started dating her eventually. And he asks old dog, "Hey dog, you strapped?" And old dog, with this antisocial, nonchalant response, looked at him and was like, "You know it." And he said, "Give it to me." So he gives him the gun, loaded it, and Kane removes the clip from it. And he goes over there and he proceeds to beat the dude with the gun, pistol whoop him, basically. And at that point, and all of the other moments that I seen, but it was that particular one where I was like, that's gonna be me. The other day I was in the barbershop. Shout out to Mike, Above the Rest Barbershop. And we were sitting there and we were talking, and he had said something about survival mode that clicked and dawned on me. I basically was raised and lived my whole entire life in survival mode. Always having to do something to make it happen and to get through in order to make it to the other side. And this was before it landed me in prison. Now, when you're in prison, it heightens 10 times worse. But this survival mode can build in you the creativity and innovation to build something that can actually produce productivity and effective, thriving utensils for us to get through, for us to live by. So what that conversation did for me was click my intriguing mind, was to make me become aware of the fact that majority of my life I lived in survival mode. But here's a question I want us to wrestle with today. If trauma shaped my personality, does it have to determine my future? What's going on, my curious and intellectual people? Welcome back to Intrigue and Insights, where deep conversations meet everyday life, looking beyond the obvious to uncover meaning, challenge assumption, and find wisdom in places most people overlook. I'm your host, Terrence Tyler, and today we're going to explore a question that might change the way you see yourself. Trauma built my personality. Now what? Let's jump into this. What if the person that you had to become isn't actually who you are? What if it's the person that you had to become to survive? So, my question to you is, have you ever made that statement? This is just how I am. Because I have a counter question to that. What if it's not? What if that's who you've been trained to be? Could it have been that trauma shaped your personality without you even realizing it? Because I'm going to be honest, it definitely shaped my personality. And I didn't realize that it was been done this whole entire life until Thursday when I went and got my haircut. That majority of the traits, even the good ones that I developed, was shaped from trauma, pain, and I must say neglect And why was it neglect? Because I have failed to analyze it and do what I needed to do to change it. Because here's the thing, we all experience pain. We all experience being traumatized. We all go through some form of fashion, a toxic and unhealthy environment that shapes us and trains us to be people in order to make it through alive. So could it be trauma that shape your personality without you realizing it? Absolutely. Trauma doesn't just leave memories. It can influence the way you think, trust, love, react, and even how you see yourself. But here's the thing, just because that's who you had to become in order to make it through what you were going through, doesn't mean it has to stay there. So the question is, if trauma has helped build your personality, now what? Well, this is what this conversation is about. So stay tuned. Let's get into this. But before we talk about healing, we have to understand what we're healing from. Because you can't change what you never identified. So let's begin with what most people misunderstand about trauma. For me, I was able to identify behavior patterns that I came across. I recognize, well, for one, let's start here. It started with a class that I took in prison called Cognitive Intervention. So what this course does, it teaches you to first identify the behavior patterns, because we can see our behavior patterns easily. And from that, it teaches you to go all the way to the front, which is the first thing that we're actually trying to do. What need are you trying to accomplish? Well, there's 4 types of needs that we basically try to accomplish: to belong, to love and to be loved, to feel appreciated, and one is basically general, which is your needs to live: water, food, housing, and we have other ones, of course, that we know. So it's being able to identify the difference between a want and a need. So for my behavior pattern of selling drugs, we look at what need was I trying to meet. It could have been belong, depending on the person, because some people do it in order because they feel like they want to be a part of the community, the circle, or whatever. It could be a loved and to be loved. Some people join gangs because they don't have that family structure and they want that. They actually want that connection. So they join the gang thinking that they will be a part of their family and so forth. But for me personally, to sell drugs in order, it was to survive in a way. For one, for me to get my food, drink, place to lay my head, and also for me to get me out of the hood. It was my avenue that I used to structure and formulate a way of escape from the poverty that I was born and raised in. So second, the next thing you do in this is your perspective, your window, your worldview. How did you see it? I seen it as, I have to sell these drugs in order for me to provide for myself and make a way of escape. Then it goes the behavior pattern. Then it goes the results. What are the results of this? Well, we all know the 2 rules that we apply in the streets. They say you either die or you go to jail. Well, technically, there's way more rules that in effects that we get in the results of living that lifestyle. For one, because if you go to jail, you don't realize that you are estranged from connections. You lose any type of self-sufficiency within yourself because you start feeling inadequate because you're not able to produce, to build, to grow, and to make a way for yourself. You now have to rely on someone else and take all the responsibility away from you. They provide your water, they provide your food, they provide your transportation, they tell you when to sleep, they tell you when to eat, they tell you when to shower. So you end up feeling inadequate. So there's a lot more of results that comes. But the end of it, it says, does this meet your need over time? So that's when you think about it. And this is how it did me. I've been in and out of prison majority of my life, all the way into this last time when I got 10-year sentence, ran concurrent, and I actually made that change. So the question would be no. And then it takes you back to the beginning. So since you know these patterns at this particular time, now you utilize it. What is the need that I'm trying to meet? And fortunately for me, I know the need now because I went through that process of the behavior. What's the need of me selling the drugs? What was my perspective of it? And what was the action? The behavior that I found out that the need I was trying to make was to survive and to make it out of the hood. So now I know my need. Now I know what it is that I want in doing this negative and bad thing that was not meeting my needs over time. So going through that course, cognitive intervention, it helped me to understand what needed to be healed. My mentality of what the streets taught me or the environments that I grew up in taught me that what I had to do in order to make it to the place I wanted to be. Because I'm not going to lie to you. I am one of those uppity type people, bougie, whatever you want to call it. I like nice things. And I know as humans, we all like nice things. But for me personally, I am willing to do what it takes in order to have the nice things. And I'm not talking about being rich, but I am talking about being financially free and independent and not working for someone else that is getting paid way more money than me for the hard work that I'm putting forth. That's just my personal understanding. That's my personal experience on what helped me to realize what the issue is and how that trauma has shaped me to survive the way that I learned to. So, is trauma one big life-changing event? Nah. Sometimes it is what happened to you. But sometimes it's what never happened to you. And what do I mean by this? Maybe you never felt safe. Or maybe you were never affirmed. Maybe love always had conditions. Or maybe you learned to survive instead to live. Trauma isn't always some type of circumstances or action that was afflicted onto us. Sometimes it's something that was neglected to be given to us. Sometimes it lacked something that we truly needed that made us feel like we were loved, belonged, and appreciated. How does that become a personality? Because repeated experiences become repeated responses. Habits eventually feel like identity. When you're doing something consistently with a routine, day after day after day, we start believing that this is just who I am, rather than this is what I do. One thing that I've learned that it's hard for us to be able to separate the difference between behavior and character. So here's a few examples of this. A child who grew up around criticism may grow up into an adult who's afraid to take risks. Someone who has experienced betrayal may find it hard to trust people. Someone who had to solve every problem alone may believe that asking for help is a weakness. So does that mean people are broken when it becomes your trauma becoming your personality? No. Now, of course, we become broken people when someone offends us or cause some type of affliction, and the pain make us feel like our heart has been broken because we are hurt. But many people aren't broken. Many of them just are adaptive. What's the difference? Broken means that something no longer works. Adapted means you've learned to survive a certain environment. The problem comes when you still live in survival in a safe place. So now we know that trauma don't just leave memories, it can leave patterns. But here's a deeper question. How do you know that you're living from purpose or simply repeating what survival taught you? And that's where the real work begins. How do I know whether if I'm living in survival? You ask yourself, am I making this decision because I'm free or because I'm afraid? What's another way to recognize it? Notice your automatic responses. Those repeated patterns have the tendency to reveal your deepest beliefs. You remember from the cognitive intervention class, if you recognize the behavior pattern, for me, it was selling drugs. And you evaluate why you do it. What is your perceived idea to gain from selling the drugs? It will give you what your deepest belief system can tell you as far as what is going on ultimately inside of you. So you might be saying, for you, it was you realizing selling drugs was a means that you need to do in order for you to profit, to eat, sleep, live, and get yourself out of the hood. But what's it like for me who never sold drugs? Some of those immediate responses can be, I'll be rejected. I have to stay in control. I can't trust anyone. I definitely can relate to that one. I used to be a high skeptic. Like, you really had to prove yourself in order to even get near me. Or I have to earn love. So then you have to ask yourself, where does those beliefs come from? And usually they're from experiences that taught you that this was necessary. For a person that lived in a violent home growing up, you feel whatever you did in order to protect yourself, to not be afflicted by the pain of this violence, was what was necessary in order to survive. So as you grew, you start recognizing patterns of other people that showed red flags on what they did before they got to that point. And then that's when you start triggering, hey, it's time to protect myself. Then you start acting out in your immediate response of defense, whatever it is. For people like myself, coming from the hood, it was, I have to get you before you get me. So therefore, if I see that you're coming off real aggressive, then I have to become the aggressor and basically dominate you before you have the opportunity to out strengthen or conquer me with your violence. And then, does those make your beliefs true? No. It's the thing that we always say, and that's your truth because you experienced it. I don't know how many times I heard that, but just because I experienced it doesn't mean that that's the truth. Doesn't mean that that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, what's true about that is that you experienced it, and due to the circumstances of the people that you encountered with, that became true to how they felt and how they thought that they needed to respond according to that circumstance. But that doesn't mean that that's the true way of doing it. What we learn is how to respond to people with people. And if we have any type of humanistic side of us, or even understand of how we don't want to be hurt or in pain, and the empathy we can have for others to not want them to experience as well, is whether we determine we learned that lesson. These people treated me this way. Therefore, this is not how you treat people because of the way that I feel based off of how they was. And this doesn't mean that you go around trying to teach people not to be like these people. This means that you become the opposite of what that person was to you for yourself. So that way you feel more like a person in a human to yourself. And with this becomes your identity, becomes a part of your personality and your character. And with that, then you will live out your life according to this, and it will attract this type of energy from other people, because energy don't die, it just travels. When most of the people come to you with aggressive behavior, they want you to be aggressive so you can respond aggressively, and that way they can actually get what they want, aggressive behavior, because that's what they become accustomed to. That's what they enjoy. That's what they believe and they perceive is the necessary thing in order to get what they want to survive. But you, on the other hand, do not have to succumb to that. Being in control of yourself, your own beliefs, by living the life that you feel for yourself, first of all, is what helps you to be able to live a life interdependent with others and encounter that y'all are healthy. But it first starts with you, because something can feel true because you experience it often, but that doesn't make it objectively true. So does that mean that trauma shapes beliefs more than behavior? Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. Behavior is usually the fruit, but the beliefs is the root. Basically, what I'm saying is what we believe is the roots that absorb the nutrition that feeds through the trunk that produces the fruit that we bear. So if I change my belief, eventually my behavior would change too. Yep, one step at a time, and it's a process. Again, I'm telling you, I did a significant amount of work to come to realize that the way I behave didn't meet the needs over time. So I changed those behaviors, which is basically behavior modification. But at the same time, with my relationship with God and studying and learning what the Bible actually says and start appropriately applying that into my life, it transformed my heart. And it turned a hard one to a soft one, to understand that, hey, this is how relationships work. This is what it means to be human. It took for me to go to prison to the full extent of what a hell can be like and be dehumanized for a person to ultimately punish you and treat you like you're ultimate trash, to come to the realization like, wait a minute, you're not even from the streets, so-called, so why are you treating me the same way people do in the streets? To come to the realization that it's just not that type of environment that I have to grow up in order to experience that. And I changed those things because I'm like, hey, I can't deal with this no more. And from that, over time, it starts to change. But it wasn't until I sat in the seat with Mike, Above the Rest Barbershop, check him out, when I realized that my whole entire life, I have been living in survival mode. So we're talking about 42 years, basically, of me living on this earth. I have been living in survival mode based off of a identity from an environment that was chaotic, stressful, and harsh, that I had to learn to survive and critique a way to get myself out of it. And I did. I did the work. But I just now come to realize this, so now it's more work to do. And what do I mean by that? Awareness is powerful, but awareness alone doesn't change your life. Just because you understand why you became this way doesn't mean that you're supposed to stay this way. So let's switch this conversation from explanation to transformation. Should I blame my past for who I am? No. Understand it, but don't become imprisoned by it. See, a lot of times we always say that think about the future and don't worry about the past. But unknown history repeats itself. So if you don't understand what you went through, then how you know not to go back through it again? If you didn't do the work behind it in order to see it, but it doesn't mean that you stay stuck in that, because then you become imprisoned to it to continue to cheat yourself in a punishment avenue where you're not growing from it, but instead you're giving yourself the permission to consequence. You're giving yourself the permission to inflict consequences for what you went through in the past. So you shouldn't look at your past as an identity. Look at it as history. So what's the difference? Well, history tells you where you've been. Identity tells you who you are. And those are not the same. Can healing erase the trauma? Oh, how I wish it could. But sadly, no. Healing doesn't erase your story. It changes the relationship with it. And what do I mean by that? Your scars stop becoming proof you're damaged, and they start becoming evidence that you have survived. Can someone truly become different? Absolutely. Growth isn't pretending that your past never happened. It's refusing to allow it to decide your future. So there's a lot of people that know me before I went to prison. And those that are still around, they can tell you firsthand that I'm not the same person that I used to be. And then there's a lot of people that know me now that never met me before prison. And when I tell them about some of the things that I did, they could never see this as even being possible. So I'm saying change is possible if you want it. And not that you just want it, if you're willing. Willing to do what? Willing to do the work it takes to understand and become aware of who you were then and what you had to become to make it through to a realistic and truthful way of what you want in the future. So, of course, I have to throw this in. Where does God fit in all this? He doesn't just heal wounds. He restores the identity. He reminds us who we were before the fear, rejection, and pain tried to rename us. When I began my process, my journey, my relationship with Christ, it started pricking emotional experience and encounters that I had from the responses that I did in the past. But it separated the difference between the qualities that I was using with the God-given, prosperous, beneficial qualities that I needed to implement in my life. Today, I can tell you, I still have the same goals, same plans, and same desires I did in the past. But there's only one thing that was changed. And that was my perspective of how to make it happen. And God did that. He did that by healing the trauma that I went through from the upbringing. But at the same time, reminded me that all of the goodness that was in me was still being watered and strengthened and grew to be used today effectively and productively. Knowing the truth is one thing, but living it is something else. Because healing isn't just changing the way you think. It's changing the way you respond. So what does that look like in everyday life? You can begin by start being curious instead of critical. Ask yourself, why did I learn to respond this way? Then ask yourself, is this belief still serving me in life? Then what's next? Start replacing survival habits with healthy ones. We're creatures of habits. We drop and pick up habits every day. It's inevitable. Just make sure the habits that you are picking up are good ones, are healthy ones. And the ones that you're dropping off are the ones that no longer serve you. And what I'm saying, this is not overnight. This is one step at a time. And how do I know that I'm healing? You begin responding instead of reacting. You choose instead of instinctively protecting. You find peace where fear made every decision. So you might think, will this ever be over? Will healing ever be completed? Healing isn't a destination. It's a lifelong process of becoming who God created you to be. As this conversation comes to an end, I don't want you to leave thinking about trauma. I want you to leave thinking about possibility, because your story isn't ending where your pain began. So, what's the big takeaway? Trauma may have influenced your personality, but it doesn't have to define your identity. And you might be thinking, what if I've been living like this for years? Then today is a good time to start living differently. The length of your trouble doesn't determine the possibilities of your growth. So here's one question I want you to leave with today. Who would you be if you stopped living from survival and start living from purpose. Because maybe you don't need a new personality. You need the freedom to become the person you were always created to be. Because one thing I can tell you through my journey that I start remembering all of the things that I wanted as a child. And it started making me realize the decisions I was making then were rooted from those beliefs, those desires. I remember my first check I seen, not mine, it was my mom's. And I seen where her name was in the middle. And I seen the scribbly on the bottom. And I told myself, I don't want my name to be in the middle. I want it to be on the bottom. And selling drugs, yeah, it does that, except I don't make checks, but I'm definitely the owner of that business. But it landed me in the place I didn't want to be at. But that's just one of the examples that I've experienced myself to help me to understand that what I was always created to be, I just did it the wrong way. And today, I'm taking those steps to doing it the right way. God doesn't just want to heal what happened to you. He wants to reveal who you are beyond what happened. Your past may explain your patterns. It may explain your fears. It may even explain why you respond the way you do. But it does not have the authority to determine who you are. The invitation today is not to deny your story. It's to stop allowing your story to become your identity. So this week, I want to leave you with one question to ask yourself. What part of my life is still being driven by survival when God is inviting me to live from purpose? Because healing begins when we stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what is God trying to restore in me? Thank you for spending this time with me on Intriguing Insights. If today's episode has encouraged or challenged you, share with someone who needs a reminder. And if you're not already a part of the community, subscribe so that we can continue growing together. Remember, clarity doesn't come from easy answers, but from the courage to ask the hard ones. So stay curious, stay open, and keep looking deeper. Grace and peace to you.